Across the Fence, we're asking grass-fed or grass-finished. We'll learn how farmers are working to graze the best meat for you to eat. Good afternoon and thanks for joining us. I'm Judy Simpson. We don't bring you a lot of breaking news on Across the Fence, so when we learned the term grass-fed isn't as simple as it sounds, it made us take notice. In January of 2016, the United States Department of Agriculture's Agriculture Marketing Service withdrew its definition of grass-fed meat. This created a confusing situation for farmers and consumers. This is why it's important to learn where your food comes from and who grows it and how it's raised. And the Adirondack Grazers Cooperative is doing just that. Here's Across the Fence's Keith Silva with our story.
In the beef industry, Steve Schubart is what's known as a finisher, even though he's just starting out.
I am a new farmer. This is my second year in operation.
Before becoming a farmer, Schubart was a numbers guy.
My original background was in economics, my educational background, and I transferred to a Bachelor of Science in Diversified Ag, and I poured a lot of time into writing a business plan that would work for me and also one that's scalable. And so I think the hardest part finally, after playing with numbers for so long and sitting in front of my computer and looking at spreadsheets for so long, was actually just going ahead and buying the cattle, because that was my big investment, and that was really pulling the trigger.
Schubart rents 30 acres of land in Shoreham. He buys cattle and then he finishes them, which means he fattens them up for market.
Finishing is putting on the final gain on that animal. I get these animals at yearlings, so they're a year old, and then I keep them from anywhere to 6 to 10 months, and that would be the finishing stage. And part of high quality finishing involves certain daily gains. And so I'm shooting for average daily gains of north of 1.8 pounds per day. And so that really helps with my intramuscular fat, or what we like to call marbling.
When are you going to be weighing them again?
They're all going to get weighed in 2 weeks.
To turn what was an old horse pasture into something more productive for packing on pounds, Schubart worked with Sherrill Cesario, a grazing and herd management specialist with UVM Extension.
That one right there. What really works in this situation, especially when you're trying to finish animals on pasture, is that there actually has to be grass. So it is management. You know, we're not just opening a barn door in the spring and saying, see you in November. You know, this is management where he's out here 2-3 times a day. He's moving the fence. He's sizing the area that they're going to graze appropriately for what the animals need and how much is out here. And every time they move that fence line, they're going into stuff that's, 8, 10, 12 inches tall, and then grazing it down not shorter than 3-4 inches in some cases, higher than that, and they're trampling a lot of the material. And then they continue to move. We have to let those plants recover. We want to see that the plants have had a time to grow back before they get grazed again. And that's really a really critical piece of the puzzle, so we're not overgrazing.
When Schubart's not out moving fences, he works as executive director of Adirondack Grazers Cooperative. His love of numbers, data, and projections was a key factor when it came time to manage people and production.
We're a 6-year-old farmer-owned cooperative. We've grown rapidly in those 6 years, from about half a dozen members to 80 that we have now. Our collective herd size is right around 3,100. And so the mission of the co-op is to find wholesale markets that we can collectively fill that we can't fill individually as farmers. So that presents some challenges, but it also is a huge opportunity for us as a grid of grass-fed beef producers to work together to figure out how we can scale up high-quality grass-fed beef and actually have a say in the quality of that grass-fed beef, the production protocols, and inevitably the price, because that is what's very important for our farmers to keep them viable and on their land.
In comparison to those other
When Schubart looks over his herd, he sees more than animals. He sees roaming bits and bytes of information.
The biggest tool we have is data. All of our 80 member farms have access to a cloud-based herd management software where they can input animal data. The most important data that we collect is weights. So all of our member farms have scales, and so they weigh their cattle regularly, and they input that data into that cloud-based herd management software, and it actually gets fed into a couple of different models, and we have algorithms that should that'll tell us when we'll have cattle 2 months out, 3 months out, 6 months out, and 12 months out. And so we know if Grass Cattle Company is having a rate of gain of 2 pounds per day, Steve's probably going to produce us high quality grass-fed beef. And so it took some time implementing those practices, but it's been huge for our quality and consistency.
As a label, grass-fed beef should be easy to understand, but it isn't. In 2016, the United States Department of Agriculture dropped the definition of grass-fed. So without a standard designation, grass-fed is now much more open to interpretation.
The meaning of grass-fed is a complicated issue. If an animal eats grass at any time in its life, does that mean it's grass-fed? Some say yes. As a marketing tool, grass-fed is a moneymaker. According to Consumer Reports, grass-fed beef averages $2.50 to $3 more per pound than conventionally raised beef. The higher cost is due to the health benefits associated with eating this nutrient-dense meat. But that's only if the animals have been finished on grass.
This lack of definable terms creates a challenge for the Adirondack Grazers Co-op.
It's not as black and white as, say, organic and conventional. And so from the production and farmer standpoint, grass-fed to us means no grain, no corn. Those are the basics, right? This is what grass-fed means to me. Essentially, you're looking at it. These animals are on pasture. They get moved 2 to 3 times a day. They get harvested off of fresh summer forage. And there are no byproducts, no grain, no fillers, no additives.
Which 3 did you think were going to go?
In addition to her work with UVM Extension, Cesario also serves as president of the Adirondack Grazers Co-op.
We don't have a uniform definition of grass-fed at this point, and it means a lot of different things to different people. And I think that as a co-op, for example, we're starting to see competition in the marketplace from imports like Australian beef or from larger scale feedlot type operations that are feeding stored feeds in the feedlot, but it is technically grass-fed, which is just very different than this particular model. And so I feel like we're getting to a point where we need some kind of almost national standard to really clarify, like, well, what is grass-fed?
Fat's where the flavor's at when it comes to beef. Cows don't put on as much fat from grass as they do from corn. So grazers who finish cows on grass have to make the most out of their management, which, ironically, means raising lazy cows.
There's a perception that grass-fed has to be, or just by nature, is a very lean and tough product. And that product exists out there, but it doesn't have to be that way. The reason that happens is because if animals are grazing and there's not a lot to eat, and they spend a lot of time hunting and pecking around the pasture to take little nibbles here and there, they're expending a lot of energy. Really, you want lazy cows. You know, you want cows, those cows move, they eat, and then they're full. It's really efficient. You know, she can only, or he can only take so many bites per day. So you want to maximize those bites, a full mouthful, and then fill the rumen and just lay down. You know, we want to see these cows in a few hours just laying around, not doing much of anything, and that's how you achieve those gains.
Between technology and best management practices, Schubart believes the numbers will prove out.
The American consumer's palate is used to this a very fatty, well-marbled, finished steak, and that's what we have to do with grass-fed as well. And it's very possible with high-quality land management and genetics.
22 is also good to go.
From start to finish, these farmers are working to make sure grass-fed means what it says and meets the highest standards in their industry. In Shoreham, I'm Keith Silva with Across the Fence.
Well, thanks, Keith. I'm joined now by Kimberly Hagan. She works as a grazing outreach specialist with the University of Vermont Extension Center for Sustainable Agriculture. Great to see you again.
Yeah, good to see you.
So what's the percentage of farmers that you work with who raise grass-finished animals versus only grass-fed animals?
Well, most of the farms that I work with are grass, because I work on grazing systems, so most of the farmers I work with are grass-based.
And so what's the advantage to grass-finished versus grain-finished?
You know, there's the health benefits, which we're just learning more and more about now. The research is still pretty young, but I think we're finding that there's much better health benefits with the omegas. The 6-to-3 ratio is better. But we're still learning a lot about that. We have a ways to go.
And how much more challenging is it for a farmer to finish animals on grass?
It is. It's always a challenge, especially when you live in a northern climate like this. We have, when you're trying to work with the weather that we have, never knowing what's coming next, you've got to figure out a way to get those animals to gain as much weight on a daily basis as you possibly can within that short season of the growing of the grass when it's at its peak, when the highest energy content is in it.
So tell us a little bit about the challenges this year with the wetness.
So one of the things that, a lot of people have noticed this year that there's not as much protein and energy maybe in their grass as they normally expect. So it could be that with all the rain, a lot of nutrients are washed out, or there's just a higher water content in the grass. But the challenge is you have to know your land, you have to know your forages, and you've got to keep those animals moving so that they're getting a fresh, as Sherrill was saying in her piece there, you really want to make sure that they get a full mouth every single time, and it's, high content in protein and energy.
Which means you need a lot of land.
You do need a lot of land, yes. And that is also one of the challenges, especially for young people, getting into it, trying to be able to afford a large piece of land. And there, there's a lot more queries now. I have a lot more people asking on how they can, if they're a landowner, how they can have their land be used, and then there are people who can't afford to buy land that really want to farm. And we do have a land link site, which is a great thing that we've had in the last few years. It's a website and everything that's helping people get matched to each other so that we can do that.
And the challenge too is that it's got to be good land.
It does, yes, I know. And it's true, we have people, there's someone who has a piece of land that probably hasn't been used in many, many years, and the conditions are that the forages aren't top quality, and it takes a few years to get it back up to that.
And so what are some of the farmers doing now to help consumers understand the difference between grass-fed versus grass-finished versus grain-finished?
It is a lot of consumer education. There's a lot of language floating around out there of all different, and we're also up against industry standards, what we've all come to expect. A lot of fat and salt in our diets, and now, for the last at least decade, we've been hearing how that's not so good for us. And trying to create a product that people like the taste of, and yet it doesn't have, a lot of the fat and salts in it that we normally expect.
Right, and to be able to say, well, I'm going to pay more for this product.
Right.
Yes. Which is the big thing.
Yes.
Is it? Are there a lot of young farmers getting into this? We saw the farmer on the tape who's relatively new to farming. Is that atypical, or is that what you're seeing more of?
That's a really good question. I do see more young people that want to, raise beef rather than dairy, unless they've come to it through family. But there's still a lot of challenges, and the biggest one is, land. As we all know, land in Vermont is very expensive, and trying to figure out a way to get into farming if you haven't come into it through a family connection, and trying to purchase it is quite difficult. So I think this land link has been very promising. We've seen a lot of matches made that way. Or people who just, actually even some towns. This past year, I've had a lot of towns that have common land that would like to see it used rather than
have to mow it, or that's a great idea.
Mowers, yeah. So that's been kind of interesting, and I'm hoping that we see more of that.
Are you seeing maybe people starting with smaller livestock, like maybe sheep or goats?
Yes, because it is less expensive to break into that. And then, because the price of one, good beef cow can be quite daunting for someone who's just getting started.
Any advice for consumers who are still confused? What should they be looking for on the store shelves, do you think?
The people who are taking on this challenge to finish an animal on grass, there's a lot of work that goes into that, and that not only encompasses the health benefits, but the benefits to the environment as well. And I think that's, we should keep that in mind when we purchase, this meat. It is more expensive, but to think about how that's also helping the the immediate environment, the water quality, the soil quality, all that's pretty important. And if we're willing to pay for that, then we should be willing to give that to the farmer for doing that.
Well, to learn more about grazing, pasture events, and farm consultations, you can visit the UVM Center for Sustainable Agriculture. Their website's listed on the screen, and their phone number is 802-656-5459. Thanks a lot for joining us today.
Thanks.
That's our program for today. I'm Judy Simpson. We'll see you again next time on Across the Fence.